So I have not met the panel yet, so we are doing this together now. Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. So we've had two good talks now about cybersecurity, which has, I think, given us good context for this discussion, which is the insurance piece and the insurance response. So why don't we start by introducing each of ourselves respectively. So go ahead.
I'm Aidan Kehoe with Oxford Global and Oxford Solutions.
Michael Kraft with Kraft and Kennedy.
Josh Sterling, an analyst with Sanford Bernstein and cover insurance stocks.
Eric Seyfried with Aon.
Okay, great. All right, so why don't we start by understanding a little bit about your perspectives on the threat landscape. I think insurance obviously is a broad topic. So first of all, I think we need to figure out what we're trying to insure against. And so, what are the real risks from your mind right now? We've talked a little bit about some of the broader concerns, but what are the real practical risks that each of you is concerned about in the cybersecurity world? Does anyone want to take a stab at that? Go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead, Eric.
Come on, someone must know.
I'll take a stab at it. I think the biggest risk that we're looking to, or people should be thinking about trying to cover right now for their balance sheet protection, is really where the first party risks lie, and that's where we see the risk transfer taking place. For those that have had some sort of meaningful breach of security, the loss of PII, the loss of corporate confidential data, when you start drilling down into the loss data, where you see the bulk of the losses taking place right now are in the first party space. What do I mean by first party space? It's really where companies or insureds are having to incur costs related to the forensics, right? Getting somebody in there to figure out the nature of the breach, how long the breach has been ongoing, how deep it is, how broad it is. To the extent that an enterprise is a consumer-facing enterprise, there will be all of the associated costs with respect to notification, credit monitoring of all the customers, and the other piece of it will be the regulatory piece, which again could be a first-party coverage to the extent that anybody's operating in a highly regulated environment, financial services, healthcare, to the extent that the breach triggers some sort of a regulatory investigation, the policies have been custom crafted to provide solutions around regulatory fines and penalties, as well as defense costs.
Hey, Eric, just to clarify, are you trying to say that part of the extent of the damage is kind of unknown, essentially, or in terms of trying to get in and investigate? I mean, is that something that you're able to really get a good sense for when there's been a breach?
Do we think the damages are unknown?
Or is it very difficult to obtain kind of a good certainty around the damages? Is that kind of...
No, I mean, I think at this point, I think there are folks in the audience today that are working for some, IT forensic shops. I think, at times it's expensive and it's time consuming, but at the end of the day, I think most of the IT forensics firms can do a pretty good job of, at the end of the day, identifying the original genesis as well as the depth and the breadth of a breach. I think at the end of the day, you can get your arms around, once you're aware of the fact that you've had some sort of failure of security or some sort of breach, about, where the penetration started, when it started, and how deep and broad it went.
Hey, Michael, so you're often on the front line as well. What do you think in terms of threats, and what are the major threats right now?
I tend to try to get there a little earlier than when the insurance is needed. What we like to do is take a look at the enterprise and say, do you got a plan? What kind of plan do you have? There's a tremendous vulnerability, as you all know. And just because you have a plan today doesn't mean it was tested. How often do you test it? What kind of reaction do you have in place? Who's your spokesperson? It's really hard to do this on the fly, and you can't play catch up on this kind of a situation. I think back in the days of the Tylenol problem. Now, in some ways, it is a security problem. Somebody tampered with it. But they had a corporate ethos that allowed them to take immediate action, got the chairman out in front of it. I didn't see the same thing in some of the more recent problems that we have seen. Sony, we didn't see them get out in front properly. I don't know what the plan was. That's a real big problem. So I would say think about what you have in place and try to get some experts in to help you. I'm going to say that, generally speaking, the people that are internal to you today don't have enough depth and breadth to understand the nature of and variety of threats that can come. Let me just give it to Aidan, because Aidan does a lot of this, and he probably can really speak to it.
I've never been given anything so nice before, Michael. Thank you. When the arms went up earlier on, I noticed there was some large organizations and some investors and some small corporations. Is that correct? Right? That's the general mix. I think, what we tend to see is that there's too much generalization. Whether you're talking about cybersecurity or cyber insurance, you can't generalize. And it's when Pete and I were talking earlier today, that's an issue. So what we like to do is bucket the middle market in one sector and very large corporations in another, and then isolate, critical infrastructure and isolate things like retail, healthcare, financial services. So, it's really, really difficult to take risk management and apply it to, generalizations to it. So I think you have to take a step back and look at what is the problem generally with the cybersecurity landscape. We isolate it as an arbitrage, that there's not enough qualified people to go around. So the expertise, regardless of your size of company, is going to be a really difficult challenge for any organization to overcome. So to echo the points of Michael earlier, accessing those expertise is going to be difficult. So I think from an insurance perspective, it would be one leg of the stool, but having a proper approach to risk management and having a risk management program where you're looking at, like what Michael Bill from Blackstone was saying earlier, protection, detection, and response, combining that with insurance, and establishing within your organization what are your critical assets, and protecting those assets first. I think most people tend to look at it as a little bit too late, and that's because if you're a CEO of an organization, you probably are not you're using insurance as a little bit too late in the day before you're making those decisions.
Okay, understood. Go ahead. Yeah.
But I think the interesting to build out on that thought, for those of you that are with sort of mid-sized or startup enterprises, and we talk about the chase for resources and having the resources in-house, the one nice thing about a variety of these insurance products, especially ones that are tailored towards a middle market type of risk, a global risk management size account or global 1,000 company can bring the proper resources to data security and incident response. For smaller companies with limited resources, the nice thing about the insurance offering, it's not just an insurance offering, it's a full package of a solution where you're going to have access to the public relations vendors, you're going to have access to the forensics investigators, you're going to have access to a legal advice that's going to tell you what your obligations are in a variety of jurisdictions, both domestic and abroad. So don't think about it just as an insurance solution strictly. I pay a premium, there'll be some balance sheet protection. I think for folks that are in a startup mode or an incubator mode, similar to a kidnap and ransom policy, you're buying a risk transfer solution, but you're buying the services that come with the kidnap and ransom policy as well. So when one is thinking about whether they want to make that step into purchasing a cyber insurance policy, they shouldn't just think about it as an insurance policy. I'm buying into a suite of services, both pre-breach and post-breach, that can provide a pretty robust solution for my company.
I think to Eric's point, so Eric works with Aon, which is one of the, if not the largest brokerage firm in the world. I think one of the struggles smaller corporations will have, if your insurance brokerage relationship is with a smaller broker, I don't think they'll have the resources available. So I think when you're making your choice for a cyber insurance provider, making sure you're with a global brokerage firm that has the resources he's thinking about or he's talking about is something that's really important.
Okay, but why don't we talk a little bit about let's define insurance here. Because again, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm not really sure exactly what the product is. So can someone walk me through what is the coverage? what does it cover? What does it not cover? What are the exclusions? What are the things that I as a company need to understand about this? Any thoughts? There you go.
Oh, it was funny. I'll take the. All right. So I'm the only one here who doesn't actually work daily in this stuff. So I'm probably the not right. I should probably pass that to Eric, who actually sells this stuff for a living. What if I could just steal the mic though for a second? I wanted to build on what you were saying about sort of a little bit of the color for people in the audience, and think about what the fellow from BlackRock said about solutions. The market, I think, is dying for a simple solution that would integrate risk management and technology. Nobody really wants to talk to their insurance broker, and they also don't want to have to think about a security department. And so, but if there's 7% or 7 to going to 10% of the BlackRock sort of spend that they're happily spend today, there's huge amounts of opportunity here. And the thing that I got invited on this because I'm an insurance geek, but I'm also like to hang out with startups. And we have at Bernstein, our little plug is we host a sort of fintech conference every year in May. And so we talked to a lot of big data people and other miscellaneous stuff for sort of all this convergence. And the thing that's really cool about this space is just, the amount of growth is amazing. If you think about all the big technological trends coming together, cloud computing, mobile, the Internet of Things, and then you imagine there's a whole army of attackers out there that are trying to look for the most valuable stuff and then steal it or repurpose it or just to annoy you. I don't know where this sort of ends. And clearly in the insurance perspective, it's growing at 10, 20, 30% a year in terms of revenues. Penetration's going up a lot. In insurance world, there's not a lot of growth, so this is a very interesting topic. But even within the context of technology, even though it's a little bit of a niche story compared to social media or something, it's a huge amount of opportunity. So I think the synthesis of some of these things, like the actual protection with the risk management, a huge amount of leverage for the future.
Let me speak to one of the questions
Please.
you brought up. I think it's very, very important to find the appropriate experts. I don't think it has to be global. I just think it has to be expert. And a lot of insurance brokers are not as well versed as they need to be in cyber. And that's the place that you really have to vet the agent. When whoever said, you don't want to be talking to your insurance agent, reminded me of that Woody Allen movie where you're all too young, but he was in prison and he got subject to other discipline. He had to go in the hole with an insurance salesman for the weekend. There's the picture. So, but the point is that there are experts in this field, and you really need to find those experts because they are going to help you through that path of very, very difficult decisions. What is your coverage? Who are the experts that are going to come to you when the breach happens? And that's very important. How fast can you get your arms around the problem, figuring what it is? How are you going to express yourself to the public at large? Pete and I were talking.
Yeah, but Michael, look, I agree with everything you're saying, but if you have limited dollars like you do in a startup, and you're going to spend them in a couple of places, while I think insurance is an important part of the solution, I absolutely would want to spend it on the prevention side versus the insurance side. If I had a choice.
I agree with you, but
I'd spend
then you better
it with you,
how
with your network engineers.
Who are you going to rely on for that prevention? And no matter what anybody does, we do a lot of it. And I can tell you, there's nobody in this world, including myself, that is perfect. Because there's always that hacker out there. So how fast are you going to get to the resolve?
The reason that's important, if you think of every other line of insurance coverage that exists, it has the same pearl every time, so it's consistent. So you think about fire, you think about, property coverage is consistent. Yeah. Cyber is the only line of coverage that's not consistent every time. So your approach to how you manage that risk can't be the same as you treat every other line of insurance coverage. So it's an operational risk answer. So treating it with just pure, while I think insurance is part of the answer, it's not just the answer, and why size of company is really important. It's not the same answer for a very large company as it is for a mid-sized or small company. It's different.
Okay, so exactly. So let's talk about that. I understand it's a multifaceted approach, but just on the insurance piece, why don't we go back to that? What exactly is the coverage, and what are the differences you're talking about?
I would say Eric's the most qualified person to talk about that.
Crack at that. The coverage is quickly evolving. It is a insurance offering that is at best in its adolescence. But there's a couple of buckets, so we'll break them into the buckets. Think of it this way. At first, you have an event. You have a failure of security. You have a breach. You have a penetration into your system. The first piece of the policy that's going to be triggered is what they'll call generically, and everybody's got a different name for it, event management. First and foremost, we need to get a forensics firm in to figure out the genesis of the breach, the depth, the breadth of the breach. In addition, we probably need to get you legal advice. You're going to have a variety of different regulators, 47 different state notification laws, as well as potentially foreign jurisdictions as well that are going to need to impose requirements around notification. Then the next thing, depending on where your company's at, and somebody touched before, you're going to want to control the narrative. If you can get ahead of the story and control the narrative, you've got a better chance of protecting your brand and keeping your customers. The next part of it is going to be depending on the nature of your business. If you're a consumer-facing business, you may need to offer credit monitoring. You're going to certainly need to offer notification to the extent that consumers, if you're in a B2C model, have to be notified. And you may even, based on how your business is built out, you may need a call center to handle the volume of what is coming in. All of that falls into a bucket of event response. Now you've had the breach. Then there's the strict liability component. Do you have a liability to a third party? To the extent that you're in a B2B situation, is the breach going to create some sort of liability for the loss of corporate confidential information? Maybe you're a law firm or you're a management consultant working on a transaction, and a confidential deal becomes public, and that public disclosure for the deal torpedoes the deal. Do you potentially have some sort of exposure from a liability point of view because the deal is going public? In addition, there's other first-party components. You've had a hack, you've had some sort of malware loaded up into your system. Now, maybe you've had your data damaged, destroyed, and corrupted. There's a property component to a cyber policy. To the extent that a firm needs to spend either internal or external resources recreating, restoring, or rebuilding damaged data, that's data asset. We've also seen an uptick in cyber extortion making a bit of a comeback. Cyber extortions, cryptoware, ransomware are becoming more and more common, both on an individual level and a corporate level. We think the cyber extortion coverage is a key component of the coverage. So,
Eric, I have a quick question on behalf of, I'm a business owner and on behalf of the audience. So, look, I don't love insurance companies, right? So insurance companies take money in and they don't like to pay money out. That's my general view on them, whether that's right or wrong. What do you think are the key things that everybody here in the audience should be looking for in the policy to protect themselves? So if you think about exclusions, why don't you talk a little bit about the exclusions that exist in cyber policies and what, as retail, business owners and investors, that they should be looking for that exist in cyber policies?
Sure, absolutely. Fortunately, I think what we're seeing now, and especially if you look at some of the public filings for large publicly traded companies that have had some significant breaches, specifically the retailers, what we can say happily is, by and large, the policies are responding. And there has not been a lot of claims or coverage disputes or litigation around the terms and conditions of the policy. In particular, if you look at the most recent 10K of both of the large national retailers that had pretty significant breaches, if you read that K, it's pretty obvious that both carriers really collected the full limit of what they purchased. Getting back to the specifics of the question, are there any exclusions that are particularly troublesome? Where we see, if there's anywhere where the policies and the ability for the policies to respond becoming a little bit, or people potentially tripped up, is really around that prior knowledge and late notice. So if you're a first-time buyer and you're buying coverage for the first time on, let's say, October 1st, 2015. You're all happy. You're a first-time cyber buyer. You filled out your application. Maybe you've done an underwriting call with your CISO or the IT person that sort of got their arms around data security, and you've got your shiny new cyber policy. You're feeling very good about the fact that you've got some balance sheet protection. You've got some great experts you can call, and you're all good to go. And then on December 1st, you have a breach. And your insurance company provides a forensics expert right away. And the forensics folks dig around and they find out that your failure of security goes back to the previous July, prior to when you bought insurance. You may have a debate with your insurance company over that point about, well, the retroactive date. You bought a policy that coverage began on October 1st, 2015 as a first-time buyer. Well, sort of like a pre-existing condition in the world before the Affordable Care Act. We've seen some issues with that.
You know, Eric and I talked about this before, and I vehemently disagree. Because if I'm going to call an insurance company in and I'm going to buy cyber insurance, I'm going to say to them, you look at the system now. And yeah, if I got a prior condition, you're going to find it out. And if you don't find it out, I'm buying insurance from you. And that's it. I don't want to hear about this loophole because they've been in for 6 months. Not my problem. In fact, I would argue that vehemently. So that would be something that would make me very upset, and I'd feel like Woody Allen in the hole with the insurance company.
Now, what
I
we
promise
do
that's not why I asked the question.
There are workarounds that, and at Aon we try to get what they call prior acts coverage. So if we buy you a policy for the first time on October 1st, maybe we try to get the coverage backdated for about 9 months. A lot of times, I think the average time between intrusion to detection
234 days.
What?
234 days, the average time.
Exactly. Carriers won't go back that far any longer because they've learned the hard way.
I don't want to
Imagine
backdate it. If a forensic organization could find out that somebody was in, why couldn't they find out at the time that I'm buying insurance from you?
Why would a really smart guy in cybersecurity want to work for an insurance company?
I'm not suggesting they do. Wouldn't the insurance company go outside and find really smart guys? Because that's what they're going to do.
But why would a really smart guy who's very capable at cybersecurity want to work for an insurance company?
When you say work,
Hopefully, a guy like it. Actually, we are seeing the insurance companies hiring risk engineers, and they're bringing technical people on. Oh, I get it. Yeah.
Hey, so Eric, did you want to finish on any other exclusions there that we should?
But by and large, I think we're happy to say the policies are responding. The other issue is, again, going through these policies are annual policies. So maybe you buy coverage on October 1st, and the next October 1st you renew them. Occasionally, we do see clients get tripped up on what they call a late notice issue. They were aware of a breach. IT guys are running around and doing it, but meanwhile, Treasury or Risk Management is in the process of renewing the insurance. And they didn't tell the Treasurer, maybe in a mid-sized company that doesn't have a dedicated risk manager. Oh, we're downstairs, and we found out that the North Koreans got in about 6 weeks ago. Occasional late notice, but by and large, like I said, you don't really have to take it from us, at Aon or any of the big alpha houses. If you read some of the filings from the publicly traded companies that have had big breaches, if you read those filings with sort of a close eye, it is fairly obvious that, fortunately, knock on wood, the policies are responding and they're paying.
So, what's the state of the market then? Everybody has it. Is that right? All big companies have.
Well, and I think we just touched on it before. Cyber's the hot product. Insurance is a mature industry. Certainly a variety of lines are mature products. Nobody wants to miss the cyber wave. Nobody wants to miss the cyber tsunami as a way to grow their business. Most of these big insurance companies are publicly traded companies. Everybody wants in, but there's not a lot of historical actuarial data. How do you do it? How do you do it right? And the threat environment is constantly evolving. And you touched on the fact that a fire policy is a fire policy, a property policy is a property policy. The threat environment, right? We're moving. The bad guys are moving away from retail as the environment is hardened, and they're moving to healthcare, which has much more vulnerabilities with respect to its infrastructure. So there's plenty of capacity. Where the challenge really is finding primary markets to write tough, large, complex risks, and we do need more market on that.
How about the insureds, though? What percentage of the insureds or potential insureds are insured right now? I mean, what in terms of?
Great question. And we continue to try to get our arms around that, Aon. I think our competitors as well as
What percentage of the companies out there are insured right now? Major companies are insured right now.
I think it varies by sort of industry code. If you look at sort of retailers across the board, retail's probably through the 50% mark. Healthcare is probably, again, at the 50 to 70% mark. Non-retail financial institutions, maybe asset managers, they're probably at the 10% range.
And law firms are below that.
Yeah, I mean, law firms may correctly or incorrectly believe that there is a sliver of liability coverage. But when we talk to law firm or professional services firm management consultants, well, maybe you do have the liability coverage under your sort of lawyer's professional liability program if your database gets hacked. But where we think the real value in the policy comes around things around what we talked about earlier was the first party coverage, having access to the forensics, having access to the legal advice. What about the cyber extortion claims? When you look at the loss data that the carriers provide, the bulk of the dollars they're paying are not on the liability side. If you follow the legal trends, nobody's really hit the bullseye yet on a big liability claim. When you read the 10Ks for the Targets and the Home Depots, it's a lot of the first party coverage. Everybody here is probably aware of the Anthem breach. Anybody want to guess how much was paid in postage stamps on the Anthem breach? Just postage. Number? Somebody give me a number?
6 million people. They'll 86 million letters.
They don't need one.
You got it? A better question yet. How many people here got an Anthem letter?
What's the answer? How much was the postage?
$22 million in postage. That's just the postage.
Okay, so
What's the total payout?
We're not there yet, and I can say they're not a client. But anybody who wants really a good read on what a catastrophic cyber breach is, I think really great educational reading, whether you're in the retail space or not, is the April 2014 Target 10K. It sort of lays out what a catastrophic breach looks like and what it can do to an organization.
okay, so within companies today that are assessing these risks, insurance is obviously one big piece of it. Obviously, they're limited dollars, right? I think we're getting at that. So how do you advise companies to think about how to allocate those dollars? I mean, what is the specific advice you're giving? I mean, obviously, if they can buy all the insurance and do all the prevention they can do, that's great.
And I agree with what our esteemed colleague here said over here. Insurance is one leg of the stool, and maybe it's the third leg. Once you've made the investment in perimeter defense, the proper architecture and infrastructure, I think personally the next step after you've made the appropriate investments in infrastructure, the next component is training, and we see the underwriters focusing more and more on training. I don't have the exact data at my fingertips, but probably 30 to 40% of all breaches are around, spear phishing attacks.
I think if you go and you meet with the decision maker, if you meet with a CEO and you want to translate it for a CEO, you'd ask, we meet with them all the time, and you say, tell me the top 5 business assets, information that you care about the most. Mm-hmm. And rank them in order 1 to 5. Well, they will give us 5 things that they care about all as one, right? So the first thing that companies should do is isolate the assets that they care about the most first. And their plan should start from the business first. The problem that's happened with cybersecurity is it's all evolved from the government sector into the private sector. So if you think about the NIST framework and all these other frameworks that have come out, a lot of it is not really realistic for people to be able to implement a lot of it, because number one, they don't have the skilled people. Number two, they don't have the time or the bandwidth. So you got to take it from the business out. So first thing is isolate the business critical assets you're trying to protect most first. You got to tackle people, process, and technology together. And like the gentleman from Blackstone said earlier, there is no silver bullet, and it's a lot of hard work. And you got to try and put the team together from there forward.
How about other thoughts on that? Advice to?
Yeah, here's my thinking. When you hire someone to do a forensic test or penetration test, have it come through your lawyer. Because what they find needs to be communicated through your lawyer. Because if you don't fix it, there is a question as to misfeasance. So I would always argue, call Harold, have him hire the penetration tester, and have him deal with the results for you. And be very careful about that.
Just if I was to say one more thing, just on an organization, if I was to pick two things from a security perspective that I was going to do, I would want to know who is in my environment, so I'd invest in monitoring, and secondly, I would invest in incident response. If I could just do two things, because the idea of prevention, I think, is too late.
Incident response meaning?
Incident response.
Oh, incident response, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
The nice thing
Yeah.
for middle market companies, though,
Yeah.
is depending on the solution, if you do opt for a risk transfer solution, on the front end, they will give you vendors that will help you put together an incident response plan. Again, if you're a global 1,000 company, you can probably muster the internal resources around data security, incident response, and so
Well,
on.
by the way, the idea of a plan is great, but we've invested in technologies today that exist. That there's automated incident response technologies that help. We've gone on breaches. The plan gets burned up and thrown out the window. It means absolutely nothing when you're in a real life breach response situation. Humans take over and they make the worst decisions. So I would, we have a technology that automates the process, that takes the humans out of it, makes it really easy. So, the incident response plan is great if you could take the humans out of it.
So let me restate one of the questions from earlier. I mean, what's your view on the security landscape in terms of how much worse it's going to get, better it's going to get, et cetera? I mean, what's your view on where things are headed right now, generally?
I think
Part A, yeah.
I think it's going to get much worse before it gets any better. It's my view, and I think people really are. There'll be a shortage of 1.5 million qualified people in 2022. People do not understand the lack of qualified people. They're not going to be able to make them fast enough. And if I had a choice between one qualified engineer and 100 engineers, I take the qualified person. So, the issue is, people who have real finger on keyboard experience aren't staying in the roles long enough, skill-wise. So the difference between a really skilled engineer who has 25 years experience doing it, there's just not many of those people around.
Okay, other views on the security landscape? Where are we headed?
I agree that it's evolving. I think that you need to pay strict attention to it. You need to test multiple times a year, and you need to find those experts that truly can look at this from a unique view, because it's always changing. It's not something that just because somebody can speak bits and bytes that you don't understand, they're smart about it. They're not. Try to find a way that you find somebody like Aidan who really understands this at a deep level, because it's really hard to find the right experts. This is not an easy area.
Josh?
Yeah, the problem is this is just the downside of our modern connected life. I mean, you can you can be driving a car that's been hacked. You can be going on websites that are hacked. You could have all your personal information stolen. The company you could work for could have all these problems. And the fundamental challenge with it, the reason you end up being so, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur trying to find some way to make money off it, help solve these problems, whatever, is that basically it's just that all the scale of the Fortune 1000 companies is sort of overwhelmed by their complexity, and so there's always going to be one door for the guy who's like who's like the modern era bank robber. But the problem is that since technology is moving so quickly, there's you close one door, there's another that's open, and so there needs to be more insurance, because there's always going to be attacks, and there's always going to be guys that break through, and we need to keep investing in more doors and more but it's their point about the 1.5 million new jobs here is kind of on point, because you don't know how it actually will ever even slow down, let alone crest.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll build this down. I think we're going to see the threat environment continue to grow and evolve. I mean, we see the threat environment pulling away from retail as we move to end-to-end encryption, and the next step will be full tokenization. It's an interesting, on the insurance side, it's an interesting issue because you're trying to design an insurance product designed to respond to human malfeasance. Where most other products, with maybe the exception of maybe a kidnapping ransom policy or a fidelity policy. So where we think, and I hate to sound self-serving, and it's not the intent, but where I think we think the risk transfer solution will continue to grow in importance is it will be very difficult in this game of cat and mouse for the folks that are in charge of IT infrastructure and incident response planning to stay one step ahead. So we think a balance sheet solution coupled with appropriate access to vendors and resources probably makes sense in the triad of risk management.
So how does the cybersecurity insurance industry evolve then because of this, right? If we're all predicting much bigger threats, I mean, what are we thinking about the insurance piece of it?
The future of insurance has to involve, the future of cyber insurance has to involve essentially loss control. So, what does loss control mean from a cyber perspective? It means if you took 10 retail outlets that had real-time monitoring solutions deployed where you could prove to an insurance company that they are a better risk than 10 of them that didn't have the solution deployed, well, they're a better underwriting risk. So, brokerage firms, insurance companies, and cyber companies are going to have to do more partnership work, and that's the future. However, we're a long, long way away from that because it's just, it'll take probably about 5 years for that to start taking shape.
Great. Others?
And that is sort of the inevitable path of this. We look like title insurance or something where, actually you do all this underwriting work up front, then you hopefully prevent the loss. But it probably doesn't static is the challenge because you have a human aggressor. It's more like almost like the thing you didn't mention was terrorism insurance. And when the industry doesn't sell it because it believes it, for the most part, it can't handle the aggregation risk as well as the idea that there's this continuous sort of dynamic of, they're trying to poke at the holes. So what could really change this, and this is the thing we were talking about before, if there's ever sort of the perfect storm of all of a sudden you have lots of losses across lots of policies from the same breach or fundamental problem, or Amazon or some big company as the good example, sort of as a critical linchpin of the whole system collapses, and then companies all have these big problems, there will not, at that point, the insurance people we're selling today wouldn't be sold anymore. You would have a lot of challenges, and you'd really have to solve the risk management end.
Hey Josh, can I just ask a question? I know you talk a lot about car insurance and the fact that you can now understand how someone actually drives and sell you a cheaper policy if you drive well. Can that same thing be applied in the future to cyber insurance? If you protect yourself better, can I get a cheaper policy?
So if you think about the infinity level of connectivity, not only the bad guys have lots of places to get in, the good guys could theoretically do perfect monitoring. And then the good guy's insurance company has no risk because he actually is doing such a good job of tracking everything else that there's sort of, in the real world, the guy who's got good monitoring is not the easy target, and the guy who isn't doing good monitoring is the easy target, and then you don't have to worry about it. So you could almost imagine the real end state is some sort of good housekeeping seal of approval, an insurance policy that's hard to get, some sort of immediate effective response that basically steers the bad guys away.
The problem with that is the delineation between what an insurance company would give out an advanced persistent threat. So most of the issues that companies, when they really have a bad problem, it's with something very sophisticated, right? So that an insurance policy probably wouldn't want to pay out on it anyway. It would be like there would be a war exclusion or something in there, and the insurance company say advanced persistent threat came from China, we're not paying on that. That's an act of war, right? So I mean that's why that's a problem at scale. So you got to separate, like we were talking about earlier, traditional cybersecurity, which you could do nicely at scale with something like that, and APT, which is different.
So say I'm a CISO, CTO, I can spend a ton of money on cybersecurity, hardware, software solutions. I could buy insurance. My main goal is to make sure that nothing happens. But like you said, you might not be able to hire the people to manage the solutions that you have. know now we're saying, there's possible loopholes within the cybersecurity insurance that you may have. Have you guys thought of partnering with a company that would maybe do a cyber audit before you go into the policy that the company would have that would give you a clean bill of health from this day forward if anything happens? If something happened before, well, the auditor should pick that up. But so that way you at least have some more comfort that you're not paying for the policy. You kind of know what's happened before that date started.
That's
Yeah, I
exactly
think-
what I was arguing. It's exactly the point. If I'm going to buy insurance, I want to know that I'm insured. I don't want to hear about a pre-existing condition. I agree.
Right. So is partnering with someone that would do a cyber audit, and that way.
It's up to the insurance company. They're going to have to say okay.
Can I
or
ask
they're
you?
going to have to
Can I
say,
ask you a question
here.
though? How big is your company?
I'm not a CISO, I'm not a CISO.
No, but just how big is your company that you work at?
myself.
It's yourself? So, because that's really important. My advice to you is, you taking on a battle with an insurance company is not a good idea at any stage. Particularly, so the smaller you get, the less shot you have. So, if I was you, I would invest all your time in figuring out ways, focus on operational risk. For yourself, you're never going to win with the insurance company when it comes to cyber. The average breach goes undetected for 234 days, right? So, if you've got no shot, even if he gets you a policy that goes back 120 days, so regardless of the size of your company, so it's going to be a challenge.
Okay, last question. Yes, right there.
So I run a cybersecurity consultancy, right?
Yeah.
Still expert, 17 years anyway. So we've done some analysis of cyber insurance policies for some of our clients, ranging in sizes, right? 5 to like 500, correct? In the most cases, buying the insurance led to apathy towards the risk management program.
I agree with that.
Right? I have policy, now I don't need to do risk management. In the most recent of those conversations, with a very well-known insurance company, right? Won't tell you the name. It was we discovered that they've been sold a policy that didn't cover them for enough records, and then as part of the response solution, the types of companies that they would partner with and provide were in most cases 2 or at least 3x what they would cost if they'd have been preventative consultants as opposed to reactive. So how does, I know there's varying opinions here, but we know that there's a multifaceted approach. But we also know that those people that are buying the coverage right now think that these are scapegoats for not doing risk management, but at the same time aren't even being sold the right amount of coverage for the number of records that they've got. Any thoughts?
I'll touch on that briefly. Some of the markets are responding with a solution that rather than giving you a dedicated amount of money, they will say, if you're in a consumer-facing model, we will indemnify you and take care of 3 million notifications, 4 million notifications, 5 million notifications. It goes to partnering with the right professionals, yourself included, on designing. Where we're not opposed or where we are on the same page, the risk management, there's no one tool. If somebody's relying on a risk transfer solution to be their solution in totality, that's...
Yes, sorry, just to elaborate on that thought, I think that's really great, right? But most organizations don't know that if you've got a record of someone and then you ask them for their next of kin, that's 2 records. So how many customers do you have? I've got 5,000 customers. But how many times are you asking for the next of kin? Well, 5,000 times. Well, that means you've got 10,000. And I think there's a disconnect between the level of coverage that's being bought.
Absolutely. If you're a mutual life insurance company and you write 5 million term life policies, do you have 5 million records? Well, how about all the people that applied and got declined, or maybe all the people that applied and bought from somebody else because you were expensive? Or how about all the people that applied, accepted, and then they gave you all the information for their beneficiaries? There is a challenge on getting, what is the universe of your exposure? And that's where the experts have to come in to sort of quantify, what is my cyber exposure?
I think by the way, I am 100% in agreement with you. I wouldn't be, if you're holding out hope that an insurance company is going to come rescue you when you have a cyber problem, and in the fundamental nature of how a breach works, that can't be your first wish. It's operational risk problem, right?
And I just want to make it clear, I have cyber insurance, right?
Yeah, as do I, by the way. As part of a risk management program, but you've got to be very serious about it as an operational risk issue, and as a part of your operational risk program, insurance is a component of that.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's it. Thanks for everybody. This is terrific.